All right, it's time for show and tell on tonight's program. Now, last time we told you about the mass protests in Mexico, where thousands are tired of the drug violence in their country and President Calderon's policies. But when many argued that the U.S. drug policies are in fact fueling the cartels, we wanted to know if you thought that American policies are helping or hurting the drug war in Mexico. So let's go to producer Patrice Innocenti to find out what you had to say.
President Obama said on Tuesday that we now have 20,000 boots on the ground. A new report estimates that just last month, more than 1,400 were killed in firefights, murdered, or discovered in mass graves. Civilians are demonstrating in the streets. It sounds like a hot spot in the Middle East, but no, this is the latest situation surrounding the U.S.-Mexico border. The vast majority of you that responded told us U.S. drug policies aren't doing any good. What's needed is not anti-drug legislation, but rather some form of legislation to make drugs legal. On Twitter, Miles told us both Mexico and the U.S. need to legalize drugs. The cost of prohibition for both nations has been too high. Chris said the minute the U.S. government ended prohibition in the 20s, the gangsters lost their black market profits, the shooting stopped, and peace returned. Tiger Wolf added, if we'd legalize it, we'd grow it ourselves, and it would be a non-issue. But is it really that simple? Tim said it would make perfect sense to end all drug prohibition today. But thanks to property seizure laws and local law enforcement agencies receiving more federal funding based on how many drug arrests they make, he doubts it will ever happen. My take? In his speech on the border this week, the president focused on gaining Latino votes by talking about immigration reform, a way to allow good, hardworking people to cross into the U.S. What he did not address is how we'll keep the drug dealers and gang members from sneaking across with them. U.S. drug policy has been a failure, just like immigration. And if the U.S. and Republicans continue to argue, if these were two separate issues, then they will never come to compromise on an effective legislation. And all we may end up with is more boots on the ground.
Now, as always, we appreciate your responses, and now it's time for our next question. Earlier in the show, we discussed the thousands of people in solitary confinement in U.S. prisons. And America likes to pride itself on its human rights record. But many would argue that solitary confinement is anything but humane. So we want to know what you think. Do you think that solitary confinement is torture? You can respond to us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and who knows, your response just might make it on air.